The phone rang at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, piercing the quiet of the night. When I answered, David's voice came through strained, breathless, and breaking. "Mom, something's wrong. My chest. I can't." And then the line went dead. Panic gripped me as I scrambled to the hospital, every red light and honking car a blur. By the time I arrived, my vibrant, healthy 45-year-old son was gone. The doctor's words were clinical, devoid of warmth. Massive heart attack. Nothing could be done. Stephanie, his wife, stood beside me in the sterile waiting room, a mask of shock plastered over her features. But I saw it, or thought I did, a flash of relief. No, surely it was just my grief making shadows of imagination. I whispered, barely audible, "What happens now?" Her reply, cold and measured, made my blood run cold. "Eleanor David's gone. We have decisions to make." Her tone shattered any pretense of closeness between us. Stephanie and I had never been friends. David had always been the bridge. Now that bridge lay in ruins, and the chasm between us felt wider than ever. I forced a calm smile, reached for her hand. She pulled away. "We'll see about that." In the following days, I clung to what I could control. I wrote his eulogy, coordinated funeral arrangements, and tried to hold myself together while Stephanie insisted on handling expenses herself. She was his widow. She repeated like a mantra, and my presence was suddenly an inconvenience. The night before the funeral, I sat in David's former bedroom, the room I had once called my own sanctuary. Childhood photos, wedding pictures, and holiday memories stared back at me from the dresser, yet recent moments with me were conspicuously absent. Stephanie had removed them deliberately. A soft knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. She stood there, her composure intact, eyes calculating. "We need to talk, Eleanor," she said. I nodded, resigned to whatever cruelty she intended. The funeral itself was flawless, the kind of event that could make even the hardest heart melt. Flowers in perfect arrangements, hymns David had loved, friends and family offering condolences. But beneath the surface, I observed Stephanie's calculated performance, her whispered discussions with her sister, revealing the cold, practical motives behind her polished smile. The life insurance alone, she murmured, would cover the mortgage for 2 years. She laughed lightly, but her words were a blade. My contributions, my sacrifices, my very existence were irrelevant. She made her intentions crystal clear. The house was hers, and I was to vanish. The day after the funeral, she delivered her verdict with ruthless efficiency. "You have until tomorrow evening," she said. Arms crossed the weight of her words, hitting me like physical blows. 2 years of shared living, 2 years of helping and being useful reduced to a handful of suitcases and a few boxes. She had removed me from the life I had been part of without apology, without hesitation. Every plea for understanding fell on deaf ears. I packed methodically, suppressing the rage and grief that threatened to overwhelm me. By 6 p.m., she was at my doorway, arms folded, ensuring my eviction was complete. Not a single word of remorse. I drove away without looking back, heading to the nearest hotel I could afford. The room was small, sterile, smelling faintly of cleaning products and despair. I sat on the polyester bedspread and stared at my reflection in the mirror above the dresser. Who was this woman staring back at me? Childless, widowed, homeless. But as I sat there, despair mingled with an unexpected spark of anticipation. Stephanie thought she had won. She thought she had removed me from her life entirely. She had underestimated the quiet, meticulous preparations my son had made. 2 weeks later, the call came from David's lawyer, James Morrison. The probate process was complete, and I was required to attend the formal reading of David's will. My hands shook as I listened, trying to comprehend the possibility that despite Stephanie's calculated cruelty, my son had left me something. It wasn't a small token or a fleeting gesture. It was 5 years of careful planning, invested, documented, and intended to secure my future. My heart raced as I realized that David, even in death, had protected me from the very person who had sought to displace me. Arriving at the lawyer's office, I found Stephanie and her brother Marcus waiting. Their polished exterior hid nothing. Their surprise at my presence was palpable. The reading began formally, and as expected, Stephanie inherited the house, the cars, and the life insurance. Then the shift. David had included a provision for me, a safety deposit box, maintained privately, its contents explicitly left in my name. Shock flickered across Stephanie's face as the lawyer explained the bank's protocol. I alone could access it. The envelope with the bank documents and key rested heavily in my hands. Stephanie's gaze followed every movement, a predator observing her prey, unaware that the hunt had already ended. With the envelope secured, I felt a quiet sense of triumph tempered by the grief that lingered. The bank, fully briefed, escorted me to the vault. I opened the box to find a letter from David, along with documents outlining investments accounts and evidence of his foresight. The money had grown from the $40,000 I had lent for the house, down payment, into $185,000 in carefully managed accounts. Each document, each statement, each record bore witness to David's meticulous care, his unwavering love, and his desire to ensure I would never again be dependent on someone like Stephanie. As I sat in the small, windowless room at the bank, holding David's letter, the weight of everything he had orchestrated finally began to sink in. His words were tender, protective, and tinged with the quiet humor I had known so well. He had foreseen Stephanie's manipulations, documented them meticulously, and ensured that I would have the means to live independently without fear or reliance on anyone who sought to diminish me. I ran my fingers over the thick envelope filled with printed emails, text messages, and financial statements. 5 years' worth of evidence, every cruel comment, every lie, every attempt to make me feel insignificant, all carefully preserved. It was a revelation and a vindication. Stephanie, so confident in her control, had underestimated both David's foresight and my resolve. The irony of the situation was almost poetic. She had spent years presenting herself as the grieving widow, the perfect wife, while plotting to isolate me, to paint me as a burden, to seize control of every resource she deemed necessary. Meanwhile, David had quietly been ensuring that I would emerge unscathed, both emotionally and financially, once he was gone. The plan was precise, careful, and utterly unassailable. I transferred the contents of the box into a large envelope and thanked the bank manager, Mrs. Peterson, for her assistance. As I stepped into the sunlight, I felt a strange mixture of relief, empowerment, and sorrow. The grief for my son was still a raw ache, but it was now accompanied by clarity. I knew I had been wronged, but I also knew that the scales had been balanced thanks to David's foresight. Stephanie's anger and frustration would be my quiet reassurance. I was no longer at her mercy. A few days later, Stephanie called. Her voice was sweet, falsely conciliatory. "Eleanor, I was wondering if you'd like to come by for lunch today," she said. "We could discuss what you found in the safety deposit box." I almost smiled at the audacity. She had discarded me, humiliated me, and now she hoped to manipulate me into some kind of compromise. Calmly, I agreed, knowing exactly how I would approach it. At noon, I arrived at her house carrying a small gift bag. Stephanie opened the door wearing a flowing white dress, perfectly coiffed, her smile bright and calculated. I stepped inside, observing the meticulously set dining table, the fresh flowers, the china arranged with precision. Everything spoke of her desire to project control and perfection. She poured iced tea, chattered lightly about the weather, and spoke of family obligations, as though none of her prior cruelty had occurred. I listened quietly, waiting for the precise moment to reveal the truth. When she asked about the contents of the safety deposit box, I calmly placed the folder containing 5 years of evidence on the table. Stephanie's composure faltered as she leaned forward, curiosity and panic mingling in her eyes. Bank statements, investment records, credit card statements, emails, and text screenshots were laid bare. Every instance of manipulation, every dismissive remark about my contributions, every attempt to isolate me, all documented and undeniable. Stephanie's breathing grew shallow. Her carefully constructed mask of innocence cracked, revealing the cold calculation beneath. I could almost see the wheels turning in her head, trying to reconcile the evidence with the persona she had so carefully maintained. She demanded explanations, pleaded for rational discussion, but I remained composed, calm, and unwavering. Every word I spoke reminded her that she had underestimated both David and me. The money I now held, the growth of the $40,000 I had contributed to the house, was more than just financial security. It was a symbol of justice, of foresight, of a son who had protected his mother even after his death. Stephanie attempted to negotiate, suggesting that we combine resources pool investments or even share the contents. I smiled gently, setting down my tea. "That's very generous, Stephanie. But this is not about generosity. This is about what is rightfully mine, what my son entrusted to me." Her face paled as she realized that every attempt to manipulate, every argument, every false appeal to morality was ineffective. The folder on the table was a testament to her failures. I reminded her calmly of the life she had constructed, the credit card charges, the luxurious weekend trips, the attempts to live off David's life insurance while portraying herself as financially constrained. She flinched, with every detail, the weight of exposure pressing down on her. When I spoke of the long-term plans she had discussed with Marcus to challenge my rights, her panic became almost tangible. The confrontation was not loud or violent. It was quiet, precise, and devastating in its clarity. She realized that she had lost control, that the life she had meticulously manipulated was crumbling before her eyes. For a moment, Stephanie sat in stunned silence, tears streaking her perfect makeup, utterly defeated. I stood gathering my purse, feeling a sense of liberation I had not anticipated. "You're not losing everything," Stephanie, I said softly. "You're losing only the things that were never yours to begin with." There was no triumph in my voice, no gloating, only calm acknowledgement of a truth she could no longer deny. I left her house and stepped into the sunlight, feeling the weight of the past lift slightly. Grief was still there, raw and unyielding. But it was mingled with clarity, security, and the quiet satisfaction that justice so carefully arranged by David himself had been served. The days that followed felt surreal. I had a place to stay, financial security I hadn't dared to hope for, and yet the grief for David never loosened its grip. Each morning I woke in the small apartment I had rented, sunlight streaming through cheap curtains, a faint smell of cleaning products lingering in the air. It was humble, impersonal, and quiet, but it was mine. No one would throw me out, no one would judge me, and no one would make me feel invisible again. I spent my mornings going through David's letters, reading them repeatedly, feeling his presence in every carefully chosen word. He had known the woman I was living with, the manipulations she had attempted, and he had acted to shield me. 5 years of planning quiet investments and documentation, all orchestrated so that his mother would be safe and empowered after his passing. There was sadness in the knowledge that he had been taken from me, but there was also immense pride. My son had been thoughtful, meticulous, and wise beyond measure. Even in death, he had provided guidance, support, and love. The hotel stays the apartment, hunting the financial planning. It all seemed like a blur in those first few days. But one morning, I decided it was time to confront the past, to address Stephanie one final time. I picked up the phone and called her, pretending to be casual, neutral, almost indifferent. "Stephanie, I'll be coming by for lunch," I said. Her tone was cautious, almost tentative. She quickly agreed, masking whatever fear or uncertainty was simmering beneath her polished exterior. When I arrived at the house, Stephanie opened the door in her carefully curated outfit, a designer dress, perfectly styled, hair, and a smile that barely reached her eyes. I stepped inside with measured grace, carrying a small gift bag. Everything about the dining room was calculated: flowers, perfectly arranged, the table set with pristine china glasses sparkling. She attempted casual conversation, commenting on the weather, the week, the mundane. I let her chatter, knowing the real conversation would unfold soon enough. Once seated, I revealed the folder containing 5 years of her documented manipulations. Stephanie's smile faltered, her eyes flicking from the papers to my calm, measured expression. The bank statements, credit card records, emails, and text messages lay bare the truth she had tried so hard to hide. She leaned forward, attempting to recover, but the precision of David's documentation left her cornered. Every attempt at charm, every word meant to placate or manipulate, was powerless against the weight of evidence. I remained calm, measured, even compassionate in my words. "Stephanie," I said softly, "David prepared for this. He documented everything, not to hurt you, but to protect me. And now you see the truth." She struggled to respond, searching for arguments, for excuses, for any leverage she could cling to. I calmly laid out her spending patterns, her financial deceit, her attempts to isolate and belittle me. The color drained from her face, panic flickering in her eyes as she realized that her control had vanished completely. She attempted to negotiate, suggesting combining resources or sharing investments. I smiled faintly. "That's thoughtful, Stephanie, but unnecessary. The money, the accounts, the investments, they're mine as David intended." He made this very clear. Her hands trembled slightly, gripping the edge of the table. I continued detailing how her attempts to live off David's life insurance while projecting scarcity were futile, how the documents she had tried to conceal only reinforced her dishonesty. Stephanie's composure finally shattered. Tears ran down her face, smudging the makeup she had spent so long perfecting. Her breathing was shallow, erratic, and I watched silently, knowing that the confrontation was complete. She had lost control entirely, not through argument, not through force, but through the meticulous planning of a son who loved his mother and ensured she would never be left powerless. I stood gathering my purse, feeling a quiet sense of liberation wash over me. "You're not losing everything, Stephanie," I said softly. "You're losing only the things that were never yours to begin with." There was no gloating, no triumph, only clarity. I had regained my dignity, my security, and my peace of mind, and that was more important than revenge. Walking out into the sunshine, I felt a profound sense of closure. The grief for David remained a raw, unhealing wound, but it was accompanied now by security, understanding, and the knowledge that I had been vindicated. Stephanie's manipulations, the months of quiet cruelty, the humiliation at the funeral, they could no longer touch me. I had been prepared, protected, and ultimately empowered. The following weeks were a mixture of reflection, quiet planning, and small joys. I began taking long walks, journaling, and slowly reclaiming parts of life that had been overshadowed by grief and conflict. I found satisfaction in rebuilding and organizing my apartment, and in connecting with friends who reminded me that love, trust, and integrity were worth more than any material possession. And in every quiet moment, I felt David's presence, a reassuring warmth that reminded me of the foresight, care, and love he had left behind. The sense of liberation only deepened when I finally accessed the safety deposit box. 5 years of careful planning, all orchestrated by David, lay before me. Letters, bank documents, investment statements, and personal correspondence. I held each item reverently, feeling the weight of his thoughtfulness and foresight. David had not only repaid me for the $40,000 I had contributed to their house down payment, but he had grown it into a substantial sum, $185,000, in various investment accounts, all accessible solely to me. Tears welled in my eyes as I realized the magnitude of his gift. It wasn't just the money, it was the message, the protection, and the affirmation of my worth. The following day, I visited Stephanie once more, carrying a small gift bag, a framed photo of David from his college graduation. It was a gesture of civility, but also a subtle reminder of what truly mattered: the son she had married and the love he had entrusted to me. Stephanie's reaction was carefully measured at first. She smiled, accepted the gift, and tried to engage in casual conversation. But when I calmly set the folder of documentation on the table, the mask slipped. Her carefully constructed facade of warmth and charm crumbled, replaced by panic, disbelief, and eventually defeat. I walked her through the evidence bank statements showing that the mortgage had been automatically deducted from David's salary emails and text messages that revealed her duplicity, and records of luxury expenses juxtaposed against her claims of financial strain. Stephanie's breathing became shallow. Her hands trembled as she realized the extent of David's foresight. She had been meticulous in her manipulations, but David had been one step ahead, documenting every word, every transaction, every subtle attempt to control and belittle me. There was no shouting, no theatrics, no vindictive gloating on my part. I spoke calmly, deliberately, revealing the evidence with the gravity it deserved. I reminded her that the money she assumed would be hers was not a gift to her, but repayment for what I had contributed and the carefully accumulated investments that followed. The folder contained the truth, and the truth could not be disputed. Stephanie's reaction shifted from confusion to desperation, and finally to the quiet recognition that she had lost the power she had assumed she wielded. For the first time since David's passing, I felt a sense of justice, not revenge, but vindication. The months of humiliation, the heartbreak, the eviction, the isolation, they were finally balanced by clarity, protection, and a tangible legacy left by the son I had raised. I had not only survived the storm of grief and manipulation, but emerged empowered, secure, and respected. Stephanie's pleas to reconcile, to negotiate, to share resources were met with measured detachment. There was nothing to discuss, no leverage she could claim. David had provided, and I was fully aware of it. Over the next few weeks, I settled into my modest apartment, organizing my life around routines that honored both my independence and my memories of David. Mornings were spent journaling and reflecting, afternoons tending to a small balcony garden, and evenings savoring quiet moments of introspection. The grief never fully subsided, but it transformed into something bearable, even purposeful. I began reconnecting with friends and distant family, sharing my story, and finding solace in the knowledge that careful planning, love, and integrity had preserved not just my financial security, but my dignity. One morning, I visited the bank to finalize access to David's investments. Mrs. Peterson, the bank manager, greeted me warmly, offering quiet congratulations and guidance as I navigated the paperwork. Each signature, each verification reinforced the reality that I was no longer at the mercy of anyone else. I had agency, choice, and the tangible proof of a son who had cared enough to protect me even after he was gone. The experience was humbling, powerful, and unexpectedly joyful. Finally, I allowed myself to fully confront the grief, the anger and the betrayal that had accompanied the loss of my son and the cruelty of my daughter-in-law. I realized that life was unpredictable, and the people we trust can sometimes hurt us. But equally, love, when intentional, thoughtful, and true, can protect, empower, and sustain. David's careful planning, his foresight, and his unwavering commitment to me proved that even in the face of deceit, integrity and love could prevail. As I walked through the city streets one afternoon, carrying the evidence and investments, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I was free from manipulation, secure in my finances, and most importantly, guided by the lasting presence of a son who had thought of everything. Stephanie's anger, her disappointment, her sense of entitlement, they no longer held power over me. I had clarity, autonomy, and a quiet confidence that came from knowing that I had been fully supported and validated by the one person who mattered most. In that moment, I understood a fundamental truth. Life's challenges, losses, and betrayals are often beyond our control, but preparation, love, and vigilance ensure that we can emerge not just unscathed, but stronger. My son had given me more than financial security. He had given me the knowledge that I would never be powerless again, and in that truth, I found peace. Returning to Stephanie's house one final time was a strange mixture of anticipation and calm. I carried only a small gift bag and my own quiet confidence, knowing that the confrontation ahead was no longer about fear or uncertainty. It was about clarity, truth, and closure. Stephanie opened the door in her flowing white dress, her carefully curated facade in place, radiant and welcoming, as if nothing had happened. I allowed a polite smile, acknowledging the contrast between her appearance and the chaos of her prior actions. She led me to the dining room where the table was perfectly set with her finest china and fresh flowers. The scene spoke of elegance, wealth, and meticulous attention to detail, but also of an attempt to control perception. I sat quietly observing, waiting for the inevitable moment when her composure would crack. Stephanie poured iced tea and made small talk, all while I positioned the folder from David's safety deposit box between us. It was no longer just a piece of paper and documents. It was proof, validation, and the culmination of years of careful planning by someone who had loved me unconditionally. I began calmly revealing what David had left behind: bank statements, investment accounts, text messages, email threads, and records of her manipulation and duplicity. Each item was presented factually, without accusation, without emotional outburst, simply the evidence of a life carefully documented to protect me. Stephanie's expression shifted from practiced warmth to disbelief, and finally to silent panic. Her posture stiffened, hands gripping the edge of the table, knuckles white. The calculated woman I had once feared was unraveling before my eyes, forced to confront the consequences of her own choices. She attempted excuses, pleas, and rationalizations, claiming stress, grief, and misunderstanding. But the documents left no room for argument. David had thought of everything. He had recorded every manipulation, every lie, every subtle attempt to undermine me. He had grown my $40,000 contribution into $185,000, ensuring that I would never be vulnerable again. Stephanie's fury gave way to helplessness. Her entitlement and perceived power crumbled in the quiet certainty of truth. The conversation ended with no shouting, no bitter words exchanged. I rose, slung my purse over my shoulder, and walked toward the door, leaving Stephanie to absorb the reality that she had lost influence over me entirely. She remained slumped in her chair, the grandeur of her dining room failing to shield her from the humiliation of her own miscalculations. In that moment, I realized that sometimes the most powerful form of revenge is not revenge at all, but simply being fully prepared, upright, and unwavering in the face of deception. The following weeks were a gentle rebuilding of my life. I moved into my modest apartment, unpacked my belongings, and established routines that honored both my independence and my memory of David. Morning walks, journaling sessions, tending to my balcony garden, and quiet evenings became rituals of healing and empowerment. I reconnected with friends, distant family, and old acquaintances, sharing my story cautiously but openly, finding solidarity in the experiences of others who had faced manipulation and betrayal. At the bank, Mrs. Peterson guided me through the process of transferring and accessing the investments David had arranged. Each signature, each verification reinforced my independence and security. The moment was profound not because of the money itself, but because it was a tangible manifestation of David's love, foresight, and commitment. I felt the weight of responsibility and gratitude, knowing that his thoughtful planning had secured my autonomy and preserved my dignity. Reflecting on the experience, I realized that grief, betrayal, and loss do not have to define us. Life will present hardships sometimes orchestrated by those we trust the most. But with preparation, vigilance, and intentionality, it is possible to emerge stronger, wiser, and more empowered than before. David had given me a gift that went beyond financial security. He had given me clarity, protection, and proof that love can extend beyond life itself when it is thoughtful, careful, and true. Standing on my balcony one afternoon, looking out over the city with sunlight spilling across the streets, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. The heartbreak of losing my son remained, but it was now interwoven with the knowledge that his legacy was tangible, protective, and profoundly personal. Stephanie's schemes no longer held sway. I was free from fear, free from manipulation, and fully capable of shaping the next chapter of my life. I understood finally that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It is preparation, integrity, and quiet empowerment. It is allowing the truth to surface naturally, letting those who would manipulate or harm others reveal themselves. And it is embracing the gifts of foresight, love, and family, even when they arrive from beyond the grave. My son had protected me, ensured my security, and demonstrated that love is measured not just by presence, but by careful, thoughtful action. If this story inspires you, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Share your own experiences in the comments because your voice matters, and every story has the power to teach, inspire, and protect. Life may throw unexpected challenges, but with love, foresight, and clarity, it is always possible to reclaim what truly matters.